hear it. Nurse Patricia's hand was still on my shoulder. Her grip tight and urgent as he whispered those terrifying words again. Hide and trust me. Through the narrow crack in the door, I watched two men in dark suits walk into my husband's ICU room. They weren't doctors. I knew that immediately. Doctors don't move like predators. Doctors don't look over their shoulders before entering a patient's room. And doctors definitely don't pull syringes from their jacket pockets while their partner stands guard at the door. Make it quick, the taller man said, his voice low and cold. We can't afford any more mistakes. The shorter man nodded, holding up the syringe to check it. This will look like his body just gave up. Too much trauma from the accident. My blood turned to ice. Accident? What accident? Thomas was supposed to be getting better. The doctor said he was stable. But these men, they were talking about killing my husband. What he saw at the site dies with him, the tall man continued. The boss made that very clear. I wanted to scream. I wanted to burst through that door and fight them with my bare hands. But Patricia's grip kept me frozen in place. And somewhere in my terrified mind, I knew she was right. If I revealed myself now, they'd kill us both. 3 hours earlier, I had been grading spelling tests at my kitchen table, humming along to the radio when my phone rang. The number was unfamiliar, but something made me answer. Mrs. Mitchell, this is Dr. Barnes from City General Hospital. Your husband, Thomas, has been in an accident. The red pen slipped from my fingers, leaving a streak across little Jimmy's paper. What kind of accident? A fall at his construction site. He's in intensive care, but he's stable. You should come as soon as possible. I don't remember the drive to the hospital. I don't remember parking or running through the lobby. All I remember is the elevator taking forever to reach the 4th floor and then rushing down the hallway toward the ICU, my sneakers squeaking against the polished floor. But when I reached Thomas's room, something felt wrong. The nurse at the desk looked nervous when she saw me. She kept glancing toward the room and then back at her computer screen like she was avoiding eye contact. I'm here to see my husband. Thomas Mitchell, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. Of course, Mrs. Mitchell. He's resting right now. Maybe you could wait just a few minutes? Wait, why would I wait? Is he okay? That's when Patricia appeared beside me. She was older than the other nurses with kind eyes and graying hair pulled back in a neat bun. But there was something urgent in her expression that made my stomach clench. Mrs. Mitchell, could I speak with you privately for a moment? She led me down the hall, away from the nurse's station, away from Thomas's room. My mind was racing with terrible possibilities. Had his condition gotten worse? Was headying? Your husband, Patricia said quietly. He's been asking for you. But there's something you need to know. The men who brought him in, they weren't paramedics. What do you mean? I've been a nurse for 20 years. I know what paramedics look like, how they act, what they say. These men were different. They were too interested in your husband's condition, asking too many questions about when he might wake up. My hands started shaking. I don't understand. Neither did I until I overheard them talking in the hallway. They mentioned something about making sure he doesn't remember what he saw. Mrs. Mitchell, I don't think your husband's accident was really an accident. Before I could process what she was saying, Patricia grabbed my arm. They're coming back. 2 men in suits. I saw them get off the elevator. That's when she pulled me into the empty room next to Thomas's and told me to hide. Now, watching through the crack in the door, I finally understood what Thomas had been so worried about these past few weeks. He'd been coming home late, exhausted and distracted. When I asked about work, he'd just shake his head and say everything was fine, but I could see it in his eyes. Something was bothering him. Last week, he'd even asked me not to visit him at the construction site anymore. It's not safe, he'd said. Too much heavy machinery, too many workers who don't know you're there. I thought he was just being overprotective. Now I realized he was trying to keep me away from something dangerous. The man with the syringe moved closer to Thomas's bed. My husband looked so pale and still with tubes and wires connected to his body. He had no idea that death was standing right beside him. Wait, the tall man said suddenly. Someone's coming. Footsteps echoed in the hallway. The 2 men quickly stepped away from the bed, the shorter one slipping the syringe back into his jacket. They moved to the window, pretending to look outside as Ariel Doctor entered the room. How's our patient doing? Dr. Barnes asked, checking Thomas's chart. No change, the tall man replied smoothly. We were just checking on him for the family. Dr. Barnes nodded, but I could see confusion in his face. He didn't recognize these men either. After the doctor left, the men waited a few more minutes before the shorter one pulled out the syringe again. This time, there would be no interruptions. Patricia squeezed my shoulder and whispered, "Now we call security." But as she reached for her phone, I realized something that made my blood run even colder. If these men were willing to kill Thomas in a hospital surrounded by witnesses, then whatever my husband had discovered must be bigger and more dangerous than I could possibly imagine. Patricia's fingers flew across her phone screen as she typed an urgent message to hospital. Security. I watched through the crack as the shorter man moved the syringe toward Thomas's IV line, and I couldn't stay silent anymore. Stop. I burst through the door, my voice echoing off the sterile walls. Both men spun around, their faces shifting from surprise to cold calculation in seconds. The tall one stepped toward me while his partner quickly hid the syringe behind his back. "Ma'am, you need to leave," the tall man said, his voice smooth but threatening. "This is a restricted area." "That's my husband," I said, moving closer to Thomas's bed. "And you're not doctors." Patricia appeared behind me, no longer the quiet nurse who had whispered warnings. Her voice was firm and authoritative as she spoke into her phone. "Security to ICU room 412 immediately. We have unauthorized personnel attempting to harm a patient." The shorter man's hand moved toward his jacket, but the sound of running footsteps in the hallway made him freeze. Within seconds, 2 security guards rushed into the room, followed by Dr. Barnes and another doctor I didn't recognize. "These men were about to inject something into my husband," I said, pointing at the shorter man. "Check his jacket." The security guards moved quickly, restraining both men despite their protests. When they searched the shorter man's jacket, they found the syringe filled with a clear liquid that definitely wasn't medicine. "Call the police," Dr. Barnes ordered, his face pale as he examined the syringe, "and get this tested immediately." 2 minutes later, Detective Luis Rodriguez arrived with 2 uniformed officers. He was younger than I expected, with sharp eyes that seemed to take in every detail of the room. While the 2 men were led away in handcuffs, he sat down with me in a small conference room near the ICU. "Mrs. Mitchell, I need you to tell me everything that happened today," he said, pulling out a notebook. I told him about the phone call, my rush to the hospital, Patricia's warning, and what I had witnessed in Thomas's room. Detective Rodriguez listened carefully, occasionally asking questions that made me realize this was more serious than I'd imagined. "Your husband called our department yesterday," he said finally. "He said he needed to report something about his construction site, but he wanted to meet in person. We had an appointment scheduled for this morning." My heart sank. This morning, but his accident happened yesterday evening. "Exactly." Detective Rodriguez leaned forward. "Mrs. Mitchell, we don't think your husband's fall was an accident. We think someone tried to kill him to stop him from talking to us." The room seemed to spin around me. "Kill him, but why? Thomas is just a construction supervisor. He builds things. He doesn't hurt anyone." "Sometimes people see things they're not supposed to see," the detective said gently. "Can you think of anything unusual about Thomas's work lately? Any changes in his behavior or routine?" I thought back over the past month, remembering details I'd dismissed at the time. "He's been working late almost every night. When I asked about it, he said they were behind schedule on some big downtown project, but he seemed worried about something." "Worried how?" "He kept checking his phone, looking over his shoulder when we were out together. Last week, he made me promise not to visit him at work anymore. He said it wasn't safe, but I thought he just meant the construction equipment." Detective Rodriguez made notes as I spoke. "Did he mention anyone specific from work? Any new people or changes in management?" "There's a new project manager named Monica Hayes. Thomas mentioned her a few times. He said she was really focused on keeping the project on schedule, sometimes working even later than he was." "What else did he say about her?" I tried to remember Thomas's exact words. "He said she asked a lot of questions about his background, his family, where we lived. At first, he thought she was just being friendly, but then it started to feel like she was checking up on him." The detective's pen stopped moving. "Checking up on him, how she knew things about us that he hadn't told her, like where I worked, what kind of car I drove. Small things, but it made Thomas uncomfortable." Before Detective Rodriguez could respond, Dr. Barnes knocked on the conference room door. "Detective, I have the results from the syringe." We followed him back to Thomas's room, where Patricia was adjusting his IV and monitoring his vital signs. Thomas looked exactly the same as when I'd first seen him, pale and still, but breathing steadily. The substance in the syringe was potassium chloride. Dr. Barnes explained, "In large doses, it causes cardiac arrest. It would have looked like his heart simply gave out from the trauma of his injuries." I felt sick. They were really going to kill him. They almost succeeded, Patricia said quietly. If you hadn't come when you did, if we hadn't stopped them. Detective Rodriguez was already on his phone calling for backup and requesting a guard for Thomas's room. Mrs. Mitchell, I need to ask you something important. Has anyone contacted you since Thomas's accident? Anyone asking about his condition or when he might wake up? I shook my head, then stopped. Wait, there was a woman who called this morning before I got the call from the hospital. She said she was from Thomas's company, asking if I'd heard from him because he hadn't shown up for work. But that was strange because the accident happened at his work site. What was her name? She said she was Monica Hayes. Detective Rodriguez and Dr. Barnes exchanged glances. Mrs. Mitchell, I think Monica Hayes was checking to see if Thomas had told you anything before his accident. When she found out he hadn't, she probably gave the order for those men to finish the job. The reality of what he was saying hit me like a physical blow. You're saying the people Thomas worked with tried to murder him? I'm saying your husband discovered something that powerful people wanted to keep secret, something worth killing for. As if responding to our conversation, Thomas's eyelids fluttered. Patricia immediately checked his monitors while Dr. Barnes examined his pupils with a small flashlight. He's starting to wake up, Dr. Barnes said. His brain activity has been increasing over the past hour. I moved to Thomas's bedside and took his hand. It was warm, and I could feel his fingers give mine the slightest squeeze. Thomas, can you hear me? It's Anna. His eyes opened slowly, unfocused at first, then gradually finding my face. When he tried to speak, only a whisper came out, but I could make out 2 words that made my blood run cold again. They know. Thomas's voice was barely audible, but his grip on my hand was surprisingly strong. Anna, they know I saw them. Detective Rodriguez moved closer to the bed, his notebook ready. Mr. Mitchell, I'm Detective Rodriguez. You're safe now, but I need you to tell me what you saw. Thomas's eyes darted around the room, fear evident even in his weakened state. The foundation, it's not what they said it was. What do you mean? I asked, stroking his forehead gently. The new downtown project? Thomas whispered, his voice getting slightly stronger. City Plaza Tower. We were supposed to be building luxury condos, but the foundation work, it was all wrong. Dr. Barnes checked Thomas's vital signs while he spoke. Take your time, Mr. Mitchell. Don't strain yourself. Thomas nodded weakly but continued. 3 weeks ago, Monica assigned me to oversee the foundation pour. But when I got there, they were digging much deeper than the blueprint showed. Way deeper, Detective Rodriguez leaned in. How much deeper? The plans called for a standard foundation, maybe 8 FT down, but they had excavated at least 20 FTDs with reinforced concrete chambers built into the walls. I didn't understand construction like Thomas did, but even I could tell this was significant. Why would they need chambers in a foundation? Thomas's eyes met mine, and I saw the fear there. Storage, Anna. Hidden storage that wouldn't show up on any city inspection or building survey. Storage for what? Detective Rodriguez asked. I didn't know at first. Monica told me it was for utilities, extra electrical and plumbing access. But utilities don't need reinforced steel doors with electronic locks. Patricia quietly adjusted Thomas's IV while he spoke, her experienced hands working automatically while her attention focused on his words. Last Tuesday night, I forgot my hard hat and went back to the site around 11 p.m. Thomas continued. The place should have been empty, but there were cars in the parking area, expensive cars that didn't belong to construction workers. What did you do? I asked. I should have left, but I was curious and I thought maybe there was a problem with the foundation that needed immediate attention. So I used my key card to get into the site. Thomas paused, closing his eyes as if the memory was painful. There were lights on in the foundation area. I could hear voices, so I went down to investigate. Detective Rodriguez was writing quickly. Who did you see? Monica was there, but she wasn't dressed like a project manager. She was wearing an expensive suit, talking to 3 men I'd never seen before. One of them was older, maybe 60, with gray hair and a gold watch that probably cost more than I make in a year. Did you recognize any of them? Thomas shook his head. Not then, but I took pictures with my phone. My heart jumped. You have pictures? I hid behind some equipment and recorded everything I could see. The chambers were open and they were filled with metal cases, lots of them stacked floor to ceiling. What was in the cases? Detective Rodriguez asked. I couldn't see inside them, but I heard enough of their conversation to understand. Money. Lots of money. And something about shipments coming in from the port every 2 weeks. The detective stopped writing and looked up sharply. shipments from the port. The older man was talking about distribution schedules, payment routes through the city. He mentioned names I recognized from the news, city council members, police officials. He was talking about them like they were employees. I felt sick again. Thomas, why didn't you tell me any of this? I was scared, Anna. These weren't just criminals. They were talking about people in government, people with real power. I didn't know who I could trust. But you called the police. Detective Rodriguez said yesterday morning I finally decided I had to report what I'd seen. But I wanted to be careful about it. I called the main police number and asked to speak with someone about corruption. They transferred me to you. What happened after you made that call? Thomas's face darkened. Monica knew. Somehow she knew I'd called the police. When I got to work yesterday, she was waiting for me with the new assignment. She said there was a problem with the foundation that needed immediate inspection. The area where you fell? I said, understanding. She led me to a section where we'd been having problems with the scaffolding, said she needed me to check the stability of the support beams. But when I climbed up to examine them, I noticed that someone had loosened the safety cables. Detective Rodriguez looked up from his notes. You realized it was a trap, too late. I was already 20 FT up when I saw that my harness had been tampered with. The clips were loose. The safety rope was frayed. I tried to climb down, but Monica was watching from below. She had her phone out like she was recording. She wanted evidence that it looked like an accident. Patricia said quietly. Thomas nodded. I tried to be extra careful, but the scaffolding gave way anyway. The last thing I remember was falling and seeing Monica on her phone, probably calling to report my accident. The pictures you took, Detective Rodriguez said urgently. Where are they? On my phone, but I don't know where my phone is. Dr. Barnes spoke up. Personal effects from accident victims are usually stored in the hospital safe. I can have someone retrieve it. Wait, I said, remembering something. Thomas, you said you recognized some names from the news. Which names? Thomas looked around the room nervously, then whispered, Councilman Bradley, Police Deputy Chief Morrison, and the older man with the gray hair. I saw his picture in the newspaper last week. He's Vincent Caruso. Detective Rodriguez went pale. Vincent Caruso? Are you sure? Who's Vincent Caruso? I asked. He's been under federal investigation for years, the detective explained. Money laundering, racketeering, connections to organized crime, but they've never been able to make anything stick because he's too careful and has too many people in his pocket. Thomas squeezed my hand again. Anna, if they tried to kill me once, they'll try again. And now that you know he didn't need to finish the sentence. I understood perfectly. We were both in danger. Now, Detective Rodriguez closed his notebook. Mr. Mitchell, those pictures on your phone could be the evidence we need to bring down a major criminal operation. But first, we need to make sure you and your wife are safe. As if summoned by his words, Patricia's phone buzzed with an urgent message. She read it quickly, then looked at us with concern. There are 2 more men in suits asking about Thomas at the front desk. They're claiming to be federal agents, but they don't have proper identification. Detective Rodriguez was already on his radio before Patricia finished speaking. This is Rodriguez. I need backup at City General Hospital ICU floor. Possible federal impersonation in progress. We need to move Thomas, Dr. Barnes said, checking the monitors. He's stable enough for transport to a secure wing. But Thomas gripped my hand tighter. Anna, my phone. We need to get my phone first. Without those pictures, we have no proof of anything. The evidence won't matter if you're dead. I said, but I knew he was right. Those pictures were the only thing that could stop these people from coming after us forever. Detective Rodriguez finished his radio call and turned to Dr. Barnes. How long before you can move him? 5 minutes to disconnect the monitors and get a portable unit ready. We don't have 5 minutes, Patricia said, looking at her phone again. Security just texted me. The 2 men are on the elevator coming up to this floor. My mind raced. Where's the hospital safe? Administrative office, 2nd floor, Dr. Barnes replied. I'll go, I said, standing up. They're looking for Thomas, not me. I can get his phone and meet you wherever you're taking him. Absolutely not. Detective Rodriguez said it's too dangerous. It's more dangerous to leave the evidence where they can destroy it, Thomas said weakly. Anna's right. She's the only one who can move around the hospital without attracting attention. Patricia was already unhooking Thomas's monitors. There's a service elevator at the end of the hall. It goes directly to the administrative floor. I can show you Mrs. Mitchell, Detective Rodriguez said. If you're going to do this, you need to be smart about it. Don't use the main elevators. Stay away from the front desk area. And if you see those men, don't try to be a hero. I kissed Thomas's forehead. I'll be careful. Just focus on staying alive until I get back. Patricia led me quickly down the hallway past the nurse's station where I could see two men in dark suits talking to the head nurse. They had their backs to us, but I could hear one of them speaking in an authoritative voice about federal jurisdiction and patient access. This way, Patricia whispered, guiding me around a corner to a smaller hallway I hadn't noticed before. The service elevator was hidden behind a door marked Staff Only. Patricia used her key card to open it, and we stepped inside the cramped space filled with medical supplies and cleaning equipment. Second floor. Turn left, third door on the right, she said as the elevator descended. Ask for Mrs. Chen in patient administration. Tell her Patricia sent you for the Mitchell personal effects. The elevator stopped with a soft ding, and I stepped out into a much quieter part of the hospital. The administrative floor was carpeted instead of tiled with soft lighting and the kind of peaceful atmosphere that felt completely removed from the drama happening upstairs. I found Mrs. Chen's office easily. She was a small, efficient-look woman who barely looked up from her computer when I knocked. I'm Anna Mitchell, I said. Patricia from ICU sent me to collect my husband's personal effects. He was brought in yesterday from a construction accident. Mrs. Chen's fingers flew across her keyboard. Thomas Mitchell, room 412. Yes, I have his belongings right here. She pulled out a plastic bag containing Thomas's wallet, watch, and phone. Thank you, I said, trying to keep my voice steady as I signed the release form. But as I turned to leave, Mrs. Chen called after me. Mrs. Mitchell, there were two other people asking about your husband's belongings about an hour ago. They said they were from his insurance company, but their paperwork didn't look right to me. My blood went cold. What did you tell them? Nothing. I told them they needed proper authorization from the patient or next of kin. They seemed very unhappy about that. Thank you for being careful, I said, clutching the bag tighter. I made it back to the service elevator without incident. But as the doors closed, I heard voices in the hallway behind me. Male voices speaking in the same authoritative tone I'd heard upstairs. My hands shook as I pulled Thomas's phone from the bag. The screen was cracked from the fall, but it still turned on. I scrolled through his photos and my heart nearly stopped when I saw what he'd captured. The pictures were grainy and taken from a distance, but they were clear enough. I could see Monica Hayes in an expensive suit standing next to metal cases filled with stacks of cash. The older man Thomas had identified as Vincent Caruso was clearly visible, pointing at documents spread across a makeshift table. But it was the other faces in the photos that made me understand the true scope of what Thomas had discovered. I recognized Councilman Bradley from his campaign posters around the city. The man standing next to him wore a police uniform with deputy chief insignia. That had to be Morrison. There were others, too. Faces I didn't recognize, but who were clearly important based on how differentially the others treated them. This wasn't just a criminal operation. It was a network of corruption that reached into every level of city government. The elevator reached the ICU floor, but when the doors opened, the hallway was empty. Too empty. The nurse's station was abandoned, and I could hear urgent voices coming from the direction of Thomas's room. I crept down the hallway, staying close to the wall. Through the open door of Thomas's room, I could see Detective Rodriguez talking rapidly into his radio while Dr. Barnes worked to stabilize some kind of medical equipment. Where is she? I heard Thomas ask weakly. She should be back by now, Patricia replied, her voice tight with worry. I was about to step into the room when I heard footsteps behind me. Heavy, purposeful footsteps that didn't belong to medical staff. Excuse me, ma'am. I turned to see one of the men in suits approaching me. He was tall and broad-shouldered with cold eyes that reminded me of the men who had tried to kill Thomas earlier. I'm Agent Williams, FBI, he said, showing me a badge that looked official but somehow felt wrong. I need to speak with you about your husband. I'm sorry, but I need to get back to my husband, I said, trying to step around him. He moved to block my path. Mrs. Mitchell, your husband is involved in a federal investigation. I need you to come with me for questioning. That's when I noticed his partner approaching from the other direction, effectively trapping me in the hallway. These weren't federal agents. They were here to finish what the others had started. I clutched Thomas's phone tighter, knowing that the evidence it contained was the only thing that could save us. But first, I had to find a way to get it to Detective Rodriguez without getting myself killed in the process. The fake agent stepped closer. Mrs. Mitchell, I'm going to need you to hand over any personal effects you might have collected from your husband's room. I looked toward Thomas's room where I could see Detective Rodriguez still talking on his radio, unaware of what was happening in the hallway. I had to make a choice, and I had to make it now. I took a deep breath and made my decision. "Of course, Agent Williams," I said, forcing my voice to sound cooperative. "I just need to let my husband know where I'm going." The fake agent's eyes narrowed slightly, but he nodded. "Make it quick." I walked toward Thomas's room, the two men following close behind me. As soon as I stepped through the doorway, I called out loudly, "Detective Rodriguez, these FBI agents need to speak with me about Thomas's case." Detective Rodriguez looked up from his radio, and I saw his expression change immediately when he saw the two men behind me. His hand moved instinctively toward his weapon. "I wasn't aware the FBI was involved in this case," he said carefully. "Federal jurisdiction," the taller man replied smoothly. "Money laundering operations fall under our authority." But Detective Rodriguez was already reaching for his phone. "Let me just verify your credentials with my supervisor." That's when everything happened at once. The shorter man lunged toward me, trying to grab Thomas's phone from my hands. I threw it to Patricia, who caught it and immediately ran toward the emergency alarm on the wall. The taller man drew a gun, but Detective Rodriguez was faster, tackling him before he could aim. "Security code gray," Patricia shouted into the hospital intercom as she hit the alarm. "Armed intruders in ICU." The shorter man tried to chase Patricia, but Thomas, despite his injuries, managed to grab the man's leg from his hospital bed. The fake agent stumbled, giving me enough time to push the emergency call button that would bring every available security guard to our floor. Within seconds, the hallway filled with hospital security, real police officers and medical staff. The two fake agents were quickly overwhelmed and restrained, their weapons confiscated. "The phone?" Detective Rodriguez called out as the chaos settled. "Did you get the pictures?" Patricia handed him Thomas's phone, and I watched as he scrolled through the images Thomas had captured. His face grew more serious with each photo. "This is bigger than we thought," he said, showing the screen to one of the other officers who had arrived. "We need to contact the FBI, the real FBI." Over the next hour, our hospital room became a command center. Federal agents arrived, real ones this time, with proper identification and credentials that Detective Rodriguez verified thoroughly. They interviewed Thomas extensively, documenting every detail of what he'd witnessed at the construction site. Agent Sarah Chen, the lead federal investigator, studied Thomas's photos with intense focus. "Mr. Mitchell, these images are exactly what we've been trying to get for 3 years. Vincent Caruso has been careful to keep his operations completely separate from his legitimate businesses, but this construction site gave him the perfect cover." "What happens now?" I asked. "Now we move fast," Agent Chen replied. "Caruso and his associates will know their operation has been compromised. They'll try to destroy evidence and disappear." She was right. Over the next 6 hours, we watched from Thomas's hospital room as news reports showed coordinated FBI raids across the city. The construction site was swarmed with federal agents who discovered not just the hidden chambers Thomas had seen, but an entire underground network of tunnels connecting to other buildings. The metal cases contained over $50 million in cash, along with detailed records of payments to corrupt officials. But more importantly, they found drugs. Massive quantities of heroin and cocaine that were being distributed through a network of legitimate businesses across the state. Monica Hayes was arrested at her apartment along with documents that revealed the full scope of the conspiracy. She had been coordinating not just the money laundering operation, but also a drug distribution network that reached into 6 different states. Councilman Bradley was arrested during a city council meeting, led away in handcuffs while news cameras captured every moment. Deputy Police Chief Morrison was found trying to flee the city and was arrested at the airport, but the biggest arrest came that evening. Vincent Caruso was taken into custody at his estate outside the city, where federal agents discovered additional evidence of his criminal empire, including detailed records of every payment made to corrupt officials over the past 5 years. 43 arrests total, Agent Chen told us the next morning. Police officials, city council members, judges, business owners. Your husband's evidence didn't just expose one criminal operation. It revealed an entire network of corruption that had been operating for years. Thomas was recovering well, his injuries less severe than initially feared. The doctor said he would make a full recovery, though it would take several weeks. "What about our safety?" I asked. "Are there others who might come after us?" With Caruso and his top associates in custody and the evidence we've gathered, the organization is finished. Agent Chen assured us. You'll have protection until the trials are over, but the immediate danger has passed. Months later, Thomas and I sat in the courthouse as Vincent Caruso was sentenced to life in prison without parole. Monica Hayes received 25 years. The corrupt officials received sentences ranging from 10 to 30 years depending on their level of involvement. Thomas had returned to work but with a different construction company, one that specialized in building schools and hospitals instead of luxury developments. He said he wanted to build things that helped people, not hide criminal activities. Patricia had become one of our closest friends. We visited her regularly and she often joined us for dinner on weekends. She said saving Thomas's life had reminded her why she became a nurse in the first place. You know what I learned from all this? Thomas said as we walked out of the courthouse after Caruso's sentencing. What's that? Sometimes doing the right thing is terrifying, but not doing the right thing is worse. I squeezed his hand as we walked toward our car. I'm proud of you for being brave enough to speak up. I'm proud of us for surviving it, he replied. As we drove home through the city, I noticed construction crews working on the site where Thomas had made his discovery. They were building a community center now, something that would actually benefit the neighborhood instead of hiding criminal activity. It felt like justice in the most complete way possible.